hopefully we'll listen to this later on. Okay. It's Chelik Yud Zayin and Pirkei Avos, Peidik Sheni. Which actually in Chelik Yud Zayin is page 356. So the Mishnah says there, Mishnah Yud Gimel in the second Peidik, Reb Shimon says, Havazoye b'Kriya Shema u'b'Tfilah. Be careful to make sure that you say Kriya Shema when you're supposed to. And you daven, u'geshat mispalo, when you daven, al tast filoscho kva. When you daven, don't make your tefillah kva miset, which means like just your out of habit you're doing. You daven every day, so you make a habit out of it. Don't do that. You make him that you're begging Hashem, that you're asking for mercy from Hashem. Another thing he said, Shimon, that you shall not be a Rosha in your own eyes. Don't consider yourself a Rosha. So these are the three lessons that he gives. Daarvan verstehen, the Rebbe says we have to understand. Number one, darf man denn onkommen zu Atzibo, je Mesichte Avos Milodik Siduse, as me muss sein Zoyer a mitzvah sesse der Reise. We know that another Sikha the Rebbe explained, but it's all taken from the Gemara, that Pirkei Avos is Milodik Siduse. These are not halachas that you have to do. These are things of Chasidus. And what's Chasidus in the Gemara? Someone that does Lifnim Yishura Sadin, does more than the din the halacha requires. So anything that says in Pirkei Avos is really an addition to the real halacha. These are extra things, hidur mitzvahs, milsatich zeruse. So when it says here in the first part that you should be careful to say Shema and daven, and that says in Pirkei Avos, that means he's telling you mitzad midas chasidus, you have to do that. So the Rebbe asks, you have to need something that should say in Mesichte Avos, which is midas chadusa, things of chasidus, as memuz zayin zoyin a mitzvah says that I see that you have to be careful to do a mitzvah says of the Torah, which is Krishma to say every day, or the Rafila mitzvah says of the Rabbanon, or even a mitzvah says of the Rabbanon, because in Tefillah itself, there are some that hold Tefillah is the Raisa, some that hold Tefillah is the Rabbanon. So even if it's only mitzvah the Rabbanon. So we need Miladich Sedus as something extra to tell you that you have to be careful in these two things. Especially these two mitzvahs, Krishma and Tefillah. Was eine mitzvahs Ikrias and Klolias and Avidas Hashem. These are very important mitzvahs, main fundamental mitzvahs and general mitzvahs and Avidas Hashem. So we need Pirkei Avos to tell you that that's a halacha. These are things that we know without Pirkei Avos. That's one question. The second question is, Al derech zeh the zweite bove, the same thing in the second part, where it says, when you daven, al tas filoscho kva, don't make your davening like something that's set already, that you're doing it out of habit. Make it in front of the Eibishter, that you're asking Rachmi, you're asking for mercy, and you're davening, you're begging the Eibishter. What is in them the roof to of their Mishnah Mefareshes and Sichta Brochas? What does this add to a clear Mishnah in Gemara Brochas, where the Mishnah says, if you make your tefillah kva, means it's something that's set every day, you do it just because every day you do it. Then your tefillah is not asking Hashem. You're not really begging Hashem. So it's a clear Mishnah. So we need Pirkei Avos to tell you something, which is the same thing as it says there. What's it adding to what it says in the Mishnah? The third question is, what's the connection between the third lesson that he says, that you shall not be a Rosh in your own eyes? You shouldn't hold yourself for a Rosh. And the reason why das bringt, if you hold yourself for a Rosh, you'll give up the ability to do tshuva. You'll give up hope for tshuva. You're not hold you back from another Aveda. If you I'm a Rosh anyway, so might as well do anything. That's what the lesson is. But what's the connection between that lesson to the zwei Friedrich Eros, wegen der Ziris and Krishma and Tefillah, to what it said before in the beginning of this Mishnah, that you have to be careful with Krishma and Tefillah, and the Tefillah should be tachnunim, you should beg, you should feel it, it shouldn't be just made as a habit. What's the connection between the third thing and the first two things? So the Nekudas Abir in the Mishnah, so the Rebbe said the point of the beer, the main part of the beer is like this. Die drei Eros in the Mishnah are verbunden damit, was der Baal HaMaimer, Reb Shimon ben Asanel, ist bei ihm gewähnt Eros im Nosei. Who said this Mishnah? Reb Shimon. Who's Reb Shimon? So this happens to be Reb Shimon ben Asanel. And the Rebbe will explain to Sikha how we know this is Reb Shimon ben Asanel. Reb Shimon ben Asanel, it says, was Eros im Nosei. He was one of those people that his whole occupation was only learning. So because his full occupation was only learning Torah, that's why Reb Shimon and Sanel said this in Yonim that he says in the Mishnah. And he was bedugma for Reb Shimon ben Yochai. He was similar to Reb Shimon ben Yochai. The Rebbe says, I'll explain later on, that he was in the same level as Reb Shimon ben Yochai, who also was Terosim Nasi. And Reb Shimon and Sanel was the same way. So because Reb Shimon and Sanel said this, because he was Terosim Nasi, that's why he had to say this. And there was Terosim Nasi, is nicht mafsik in limit zu Krishma. The din is that somebody who is Terosim Nasi, who's constantly occupied only in learning, so he doesn't have to stop learning even to say Shema. The Rashbi is in Yerushalmi, like Reb Shimon Yochai says in Yerushalmi, to gain honor, for instance, us, which means someone like him, who's Terosim Nasi, we learn Torah so much. I feel the Krishma in the Masikim. We're not even interrupting our learning to say Shema. Certainly, he doesn't interrupt his learning to daven. This is already a psak din, not only in Yerushalmi. This is a psak din in the Gemara. That those that are Teirosim Nosi don't interrupt their learning to tefillah. So he himself, Reb Shimon himself, being Reb Shimon ben Sanel, who was Teirosim Nosi, so he did not have to stop his learning in order to say Shema and in order to daven. Since he himself did not interrupt his learning to say Shema and to daven, but the Gedab Bavoden is eine Talmidim, so he had to make sure that his Talmidim don't follow him. Seeing how he behaved, and they'll see that he is not saying Krishma and he's not davening, it might weaken their feeling towards saying Krishma and Tefillah. That's why he, because it's Reb Shimon ben Sanel, they had to tell his Talmidim, no, you have to be careful in Krishma and Tefillah. That's one first lesson. So that answers the first kasha. Does he have to tell us that you have to be careful in the mitzvah sesa that I say, or even the Rabbanon? So he says he's not just Tam, because he was afraid they'd look at him and he's there is Talmidim, and he doesn't have to stop, and he doesn't stop to learn from learning Torah to say Shema and Tefillah. They might do the same. That's why he said it. That's the first thing. Now he's saying a second lesson to his friends. He also did Terosim Nosim. As the Rebbe explains here, and he's going to explain later on, that there are two levels in Terosim Nosim. There's a higher level in Terosim Nosim, like Reb Shimon ben Yochai, that's completely involved in learning nothing else. And then there's others who are also Terosim Nosim, but not in the same level, the same strength as him. So Reb Shimon ben Sanel was completely Terosim Nosim, as the Rebbe will explain later, like Reb Shimon ben Yochai was completely Terosim Nosim. But his Chaverim, was given Terosim Nosim, is also Terosim, nicht in sein Target, not in his level. Und darüber darfen sie jemabsig sein le Krishma. So his Chaverim did have to stop to say Krishma. But Dugma to Chaver Reb Shimon ben Yochai, as I'll explain later, that the Chaverim of Reb Shimon ben Yochai, because they were not in the same level of Terosim Nosim, they had to interrupt their learning to say Shema. So Chaverim by Reb Shimon and Sanel the same way. So he's telling them, Kishata mispalel al tas filoscha kva lerachem v'tachnunim. When you daven, you should make your tefillah should not be kva, should not be out of habit, just set every day, but you should make it rachem v'tachnunim. Which means like this: the chaverim of Reb Shimon ben Yochai and Reb Shimon ben Sanel were in a lower level, and because they were in a lower level, they did have to interrupt their learning to say Shema, but not for tefillah. In tefillah, even their level was enough that you don't have to stop for davening. So he's telling, the first thing he says, B'chlal is Talmidim, they should not be weak in the midst of Krishma and Tefillah, looking at him that he doesn't say Krishma, doesn't say Tefillah because he doesn't have to. Then the second thing he's telling is Chaverim. Chaverim is not his Talmidim. And his Chaverim, they were people that also did not have to stop in order to daven, but they had to stop in order to learn. So he's telling them, since you don't have to stop in order to daven, but true that you don't have to interrupt your learning to daven, not every day. That's what he says. When you do daven, because from time to time they did daven. In the time when they did daven, because we know the halacha is that even though we said terosim nosei, even the lower level doesn't interrupt to say Shema. But doesn't interrupt, he says before that they don't have to stop to daven. They have to interrupt to Krishma, but they don't have to interrupt to daven. But nevertheless, from time to time, they do have to daven. So he's telling him, when you do daven, so the tefillin is on an from kva. It shouldn't be kva. Kva means that it's set. So you're davening out of habit, and at the same time, while you're davening, you're thinking in your mind, Mosrai, Efrek Melai Elze, when will I get rid of this load? In other words, it's a burden on his head. And you'll be able to return to learning Torah. So Taka, since we tell them that they don't have to really daven normally every day, so they might, when they do daven, they might think it's just a by the way thing, so I can't wait till I stop and I'll be able to continue learning. So he's telling him, no, when you do daven, because he's all zay, they have to be asking for mercy and begging Hashem, that you have to do it not out of habit, you have to do it with feeling. So that's the second one. So again, the first thing is he's telling his Talmidim, you have to say Krishma and you have to daven because you're not terosim nosei. Then he's telling to his chaverim, you guys are terosim nosei. And therefore you also don't have to interrupt to daven. Krishma you have to say because you're in a lower level. But to daven you don't have to. But when you do daven, remember, the davening should be rachmim v'tachnunim. There is about the ditero, so too by the third lesson, you should not be a Rosh in your own eyes. This also comes because it was Reb Shimon Nesanel, was Terosim Nose, as we said, we'll explain later, the Rebbe says. So the basic thing that the Rebbe is saying, Reb Shimon said this. It was Reb Shimon Nesanel. Reb Shimon Nesanel was Terosim Nose. And because Terosim Nose, that's why he had to say these three things. The first two, the Rebbe explained what this has to do with Terosim Nose. But the third thing he will explain later. And here I want to stop for a second and explain. If you look at the end of the Sikha, the date when the Farbrengen was, when the Rebbe said the Sikha, you'll see here, the Sikha Shabbos Parshas Ba'aleischo, Shlach, Ubolok, Tovshin Chovches. So I remember when this was, it went on a few Farbrengens. Now sometimes we have Sikhas that has a few dates because the Rebbe spoke about it a few times, or in two different times. Here it was, the Rebbe explained this Mishnah in the first Farbrengen, Ba'aleischo, and explained that this has to do with Terosim Nose, as we're saying now. And since the Mishnah is Reb Shimon, and Stam Reb Shimon is Reb Shimon ben Yechoy, and Reb Shimon Yechoy is Terosim Nose. That's what the Rebbe said. Few Farbrengens later, the Rebbe was very upset. He said, I was waiting for people to ask a question. And no one asked. The pale people say quietly, they asked, but never got to the Rebbe, that this Reb Shimon is not Reb Shimon ben Yechoy. It's Reb Shimon Nesanel. So how did the Rebbe explain this whole Mishnah based on the fact that the Reb Shimon Yechoy and Terosim Nose? So the Rebbe was very upset. He spoke very sharp about how people don't really pay attention and don't care, etc. But then the Rebbe continued. So what is the pshat, the real pshat? The real pshat is it's Reb Shimon Nesanel. But Reb Shimon Nesanel's madrege was the same thing about Reb Shimon Yechoy. So the whole beer that he gave, that this has to do with Reb Shimon Yechoy, who's Terosim Nose, fits anyway, even if it's Reb Shimon Nesanel. And it seems like the Rebbe said the word of Shimon Yechoy, and gave the beer. He wanted to test the people. Will people pay attention and look into what he said? But the beer is the same. And that's going to be half of the Sikha. That's the last Farbrengen of the three he explained how the Shimon Nesanel is the same level of Terosim Nose, the highest level like Shimon Yechoy. The whole beer that this has to do with Terosim Nose fits Shimon Nesanel too. But he was upset why people didn't chap. But L'chatchila explained this at Shimon Yechoy just to see. But the beer is there, and as we'll see. So the first two we know, the third one we'll see later. Then the Rebbe says like this: if in beer now, in our Beizoi Bekrishma Kemal and the explanation the Rebbe said it before, that why did he say Avizoi Bekrishma? Because he was Terosim Nose. He didn't have to say Krishma. So he said, be careful to say Krishma to his Talmidim who might learn from him that he shouldn't learn. So I have a kasha the Rebbe says on this. The day of Reb Shimon Yechoy, like Krishma and Mafsikin, brings sich nor in Yishalmi. This din, that if you're Terosim Nose, you don't have to stop, you don't have to interrupt your learning, even for Shema, is in Yerushalmi, but it's only in Yerushalmi. Aber Ladas Abavli, Nazeich La'aloch, as einen Eich Divas Terosim and Nosam, Nafilu Kagon of Shimon Yechoy, V'chaverim, Mafsikin the Krishma. But in our Gemara, in Bavli, and that's the halacha, even somebody who's Terosim Nose has to stop and say Shema. So the whole beer only fits if you go according to Yerushalmi. But the beer that the Rebbe said before, that the whole thing, why he's telling him to be careful with Shema, is because Terosim Nose doesn't have to say Shema, so they shouldn't learn from him. That's not according to the Bavli. But the Rebbe says no. Is the Asbor in them? explanation is like this. Leighton Klalas Madat Mashvis on Babli Yerushalmi Kol Madefsher. Seemingly there's a machlokes between Babli and Yerushalmi here. Yerushalmi says that Terosim Nosei does not have to stop to learn say Shema, and Babli doesn't say it. So obviously the Babli holds that even Terosim Nosei does have to interrupt. So Rebbe said there is a cloud that when we have a machlokes Babli and Yerushalmi, we have to find an explanation that they should not really be arguing. We have to find some kind of explanation that they do fit. Afilo durchzogen apirish was is doch says in the Yad Malachi, it says in the Mefarshim that even if you're going to give a teretz that's not such a good teretz, it's a deichik, nevertheless, you could say it in order to make that Babli and Yerushalmi don't argue. So since that is mistaver to zog, based on that approach, makes sense to say, Azeich do is nicht complete zwischen Babli and Yerushalmi. That in this scene there is not a machlekes Babli and Yerushalmi. Nor as achilik zwischen Ashbi aleinu chaveiro. The difference is between Reb Shimon and Yechoye and his chaverim. In Babli, in Yerushalmi, it says that Reb Shimon and Yechoye said Keganan, that's us, meaning him, did not have to interrupt. And when the Babli comes out that you do have to interrupt, it's not talking about him. It's talking about the other people who are his chaverim. As we said before, we're going to get to that there are two levels. The time for us, Reb Shimon and Yechoye halt as the reason why Reb Shimon and Yechoye holds that you don't interrupt to say Shema is weil zeh talmatei shinun v'zeh krishma is also shinun. They mevat on shinun it's shinun because it says shinun means learning. V'shinantam levanecha. Krishma is learning. Learning Torah is learning. It's also learning Torah. They're both learning Torah. So Reb Shimon Chayi says, if I'm constantly learning Torah, why should I be mevatel the learning that I'm doing in order to learn something else? That's what he says. And then Yerushalmi continues according to one teretz. Reb Shimon Yechoye, Reb Shimon Yechoye, since he was very sharp, or he was constantly learning Torah, so he didn't feel Krishma is more important than Torah, because Torah was the most important thing, and Krishma is also Torah. So that's why he said that you don't, with so much involved in Torah, does not interrupt his learning in order to say Shema. If that's the reason, we could say, only Reb Shimon Yechoye, in that level that he was, did not interrupt the learning Torah. Like the Gemara, the Loshen there is, Reb Shimon Yechoye, Reb Shimon Yechoye, because he was so sharp in Torah, so on him, it wasn't so beloved. The specialty of Krishma was not so great. But his friends, did stop to forsake Krishma. So really, there's no machlokes. When the Babli it comes out that even Terosim Nosi has to interrupt to say Shema, goes on the lower level. People who are not mamish like Reb Shimon Yechoye. In the Shalmei, where it says that you don't interrupt, that's Reb Shimon Yechoye himself. And the Rebbe continues, but Reb Shimon Yechoye Gufa. You can say the same thing within Reb Shimon Yechoye also. Yeshleimer, as I say, by him given achilik, Eider is given in Meire, there's Manoch Laner is given. In him itself, there were two times. The time before he came to the cave when he was there, or after the time when he was in the cave and he came out. Ados was like the Krishma, this that he was involved so much in learning that he didn't even stop to say Shema, but that started only after he came out of the cave, after the 13 years. That's when he reached a higher level in learning Torah. The Gemara says in Shabbos that when he came out and he saw his father-in-law, Pinchas ben Yoyer, so he said to Pinchas ben Yoyer, said, "Oh, that I see you in such a matzav, the way he was sick." So he tells him that Baruch Hashem, I'm like that. And then the Gemara says, till then, the Shimon Yechoye would ask his father-in-law a question, and I think he would give him 12 answers, if I remember correctly, on every question. Now, the Pinchas ben Yoyer asked Reb Shimon Yechoye a question, and he answered him 24 answers, something like that. I forgot the exact numbers. So he reached the highest level in learning Torah. So after he came out of the cave, then his learning Torah was so strong that he didn't have to interrupt for Shema. But before he went into the cave, he himself had to interrupt. Ubemela, you could say there is no machlekes Babli and Yerushalmi. They both could be talking about Rashbi. And the Babli holds that he had to interrupt this before he went to the cave. Yes, Shleimer. So that's when the gate of Shimon Yechoye. So we could say as Reb Shimon and Sanel is given, but do much Reb Shimon Yechoye. Reb Shimon Sanel like Reb Shimon Yechoye. The is given the way Reb Shimon Yechoye was in the higher level. Kedel lekamen, as soon I will explain. And the father that it mafsik them the Krishma. So Reb Shimon Sanel also didn't stop the Krishma. The male, the beer that Rebbe said before makes sense. Hitake, even according to the Babli, Reb Shimon and Sanel did not interrupt for saying Shema. But Mela, we could say the beer that he was afraid his Talmidim will look at him and say, well, so Shema is not so important. The same thing with davening. That's why he told him, have a Zohar, be careful. Not because we have to tell a Yid, be careful. It's a mitzvah, why do you have to be careful? Because he was Terosim Nosi in a way that he was put in the highest level, because he was like Reb Shimon ben Yochai, the Mela had to say that. Or that Inyan about Reb Shimon ben Nesanel, he then Terosim Nosi v'Rashbi. This about Reb Shimon ben Nesanel, he was Terosim Nosi the same level as Reb Shimon ben Yochai. Und das ist in der Nekuda von the drei Eros from the Mishnah, and that's the Nekuda of the Mishnah, the three things in the Mishnah, as we explained before the first two, and the third one we didn't get to yet. But the whole point of all three things in the Mishnah is based on the fact that he was Terosim Nosi in such a high level. His merumis in them, it's hinted in this fact, but the Mesader Mishnah, the don't need shame of it from Balamayim. That the one that wrote this Mishnah in Pirkei Avos says Reb Shimon Eimer, and he doesn't say Reb Shimon ben Nesanel, doesn't say his father. Reb Shimon ben Nesanel is a full name in Kerogav, like usually when you refer to Reb Shimon ben Nesanel, you say Reb Shimon ben Nesanel. But Blaze Reb Shimon Stam, he says Stam the word Reb Shimon. But Stam Reb Shimon is Go Reb Shimon Yochai, Stam Reb Shimon Yochai. So L'chura, he should have said the name, but he wants to hint, as the Rebbe will explain. He wants to hint. Why didn't he say Ben Nesanel? He wants to hint to Reb Shimon Yochai Taki. Stam Reb Shimon usually Shas is Reb Shimon Yochai. He wants to hint to Reb Shimon Nesanel. But the reason he said it is because he's like Reb Shimon Stam, like Shimon Yochai. And then the Rebbe says, L'chura, what was the shayla? Why doesn't the Mishnah say his name Beferish? The Mishnah doesn't have to. Simple reason why it doesn't have to. This Mishnah comes in continuation to previous Mishnahs. Where mentions the five Talmidim and Rabbi and Mazakai had. Amongst the five, it says clearly the word of Shimon and Nesanel. Then it says these five said three things. Each one said three things. So it's obvious that when it says that they said, each one said three things, Reb Shimon said what we learned before. Obviously, which Reb Shimon is it? The Reb Shimon that was mentioned before as one of the five Talmidim of Rabbi Yechon and Zakai, which are Reb Shimon and Nesanel. So B'meila, that's the reason it doesn't. So what's the kasha? The Rebbe said, L'chura, why doesn't he mention Reb Shimon and Nesanel? Why did they say Stam Reb Shimon? It's not a kasha. The pashtas, this is the answer because it's self-understood. The Rebbe says, no, it's everything in the Torah is exact. Especially that these lessons of Reb Shimon and Nesanel is a separate Mishnah. Pretty far, not very far, but pretty far from when his name is mentioned fully. So someone could make a mistake. For them was learned blaze the Mishnah at the Balamayim as Reb Shimon Yochai. So since some people just learn one Mishnah, let's say a person just happened to be learning this Mishnah, what will he think? He won't know or remember that before that Reb Shimon was mentioned and it said Reb Shimon and Nesanel, and this is the same person. So it makes a place that a person could make a mistake and think it's Reb Shimon ben Yochai. So why didn't it say clearly Reb Shimon and Nesanel here? It's verstandig am etzadem tam pnimi in the Eros from Reb Shimon and Nesanel, because the answer is because the deeper reason, what the meaning of the three things that Reb Shimon and Nesanel said is negei nit norba said is Reb Shimon and Nesanel, not that who he is. Reb Shimon and Nesanel said it. Nor Dosva said is Reb Shimon Stam. Reb Shimon Yochai. The reason why he said it is connected to the fact that he is the same level as Reb Shimon ben Yochai, which is called Reb Shimon Stam. So even though it's not Reb Shimon ben Yochai, and it's obvious it's not Reb Shimon ben Yochai, but the Mishnah especially did not mention again Reb Shimon Nesanel, the word by Nesanel, to avoid any mistake, to hint that this is connected to Reb Shimon. And if right away when you think of Reb Shimon Stam, who's Reb Shimon Stam? Reb Shimon Yochai. So the fact that Reb Shimon Nesanel is the same level as Reb Shimon Yochai, that they don't seem no say, that's why he said what he said. Yes, but Rebbe said, now the Rebbe is going to explain. The Tampanimi was Stam Reb Shimon to Reb Shimon Yochai. What's the simple reason? Now, I mean, not the simple, the Panimi is the reason. Why is Stam Reb Shimon, whenever it says Reb Shimon, goes on Reb Shimon Yochai, but the name Shimon is from Loshen Shmiyah. The name Shimon comes, so that's from the Posik. The Posik says, why did he call him Shimon? Because of Shoma Hashem. So it comes from hearing. What does hearing really mean? The real meaning of hearing. Not there's in Yiddish we say Herren, und der Herren. That means it penetrates into your mind. Understanding. So Shmi is understanding. We know that When Eden said, Nasa v'nishma, we will do and then we will hear. That didn't mean we will do and then we will hear. That means before that they didn't hear what they have to do. So how could they do if they didn't hear? They're going to hear after they do. There, the word hearing means understanding. We'll do before we understand. So Shmiya means understanding. Another ayah that we have from Sukkim, that Shmiya means understanding. Und der Ringe von Terose im Nosse, wo der Ried vereinzigt sich mit Teure, diese wäre sein ganzer Umnes. Terose im Nosse means that the Torah is your umness, is your occupation completely. What makes the person that level? Kum davke, when by him is the haskola, the Pashtani Torah b'shtamusse. If the understanding of Torah is complete, was demelt wird der vereinzigt mit Torah, then he becomes united with the Torah. Tanya, like it says in Tanya, that when you learn Torah, you become united with a yichud niflo shein yichud kameya, a very great union, a great unity that has nothing similar to it. That your brain and the Torah, the idea that you're learning becomes one. So if you understand something very, very strongly, then you become one with it. So Teirosayim Nosei, why was the person Teirosayim Nosei? Because his understanding of Torah was so great that became his occupation, that became his life. So that's the reason why Reb Shimon ben Yochai, name Reb Shimon, and whenever it says Shimon Stam, it goes on Reb Shimon ben Yochai Teirosayim Nosei, because Teirosayim Nosei, that the Torah is your full occupation, and Shmiya, which means understanding, go hand in hand, they go together. That's why Stam Shimon is Teirosayim Nosei, Stam Shimon is Reb Shimon ben Yochai. But it's verstanden, wenn wir alle haben demselben Namen. So B'meile, this applies to everybody who has the name Shimon. Okay, you do, as we know, the Shemus Na'iden. We know that the names of Yidden, the Frat from the Tanoim, the Chul Tanoim, the Amaroim, etc., give Maroizim Teichen in the Kud of Zeir Avedet. That gives out what is in the Kud of your Avedet, and that's hinted in the name. As Bazei is do behelam akapodim, I'm ain't for Stam Reb Shimon. Anybody is called Reb Shimon is like Reb Shimon Yochai, like Stam Reb Shimon, which is understanding Torah betachlis, which is Terosim Nosei. Like by some people, it's only a potential because we see many people called Shimon and they're not in that level, but they definitely have a potential to be like Reb Shimon Yochai Terosim Nosei. The far as the Mishnah Medayik to sagen, Reb Shimon Stam, that's why here the Mishnah says Stam Reb Shimon. And those was Reb Shimon Nasanel, and he should have really said Reb Shimon Nasanel. And those was Reb Shimon Nasanel gesagt the heroes, because the Mishnah wants to tell us that these three lessons that Reb Shimon here, which Reb Shimon Nasanel said, is mitzadem was hotten sich the Meile for Reb Shimon Stam Reb Shimon Yochai. It's because he has the Meile of Reb Shimon without the name Stam Reb Shimon, which is Reb Shimon Yochai, because he has the Meile of Terosim Nosei. That's why he had to say these three things. So we understand already the connection between the Shimon Nasanel and the three things that he said, and then Reb Shimon Stam. Together from the Rosim Nosim Pashtus is not the Rebbe said, what's the Rosim Nosim? It's simple pshat. Number one, this is an Inyan Izman. It's in time. Learn Torah on Ufer is nicht mafsik with Kezach. He learns Torah without a stop and doesn't interrupt for anything. That's the Rosim Nosim constantly. The second thing is, as is do ich ba limud nigla the Torah. Discuss about Terosim Nosei could be also by nigla. You learn Posha Gemara, you learn Poskim, you learn Terosim, and if you keep on learning constantly, it's Terosim Nosei. When we find by the Shimon ben Yochai Gufe, by the Shimon Yochai itself, as I feel in Meire, when he was the 13 years in the cave, is Ikeros gegen Teres HaMishnayis. What did he mainly learn? Not Kabbalah, not Chassidus. He learned mainly Mishnayis. We need to say for Azeir, Vatikunim, not in Zeir and the Tikkun Zeir. You see, order 41, he brings this from the Geras HaKedesh of the Alter Rebbe. So, Reb Shimon Yochai is called Terosim Nosei, and what was his main learning? Nigla. So, if you learn a lot of Nigla constantly, you're also in the level Terosim Nosei. It's obvious. Steht aber in Zeir. On the other hand, it says in Zeir, as mit Terosim am Nosei meint man die, was lei Zoza Shchinem in Henkel Yemein. Terosim Nosei doesn't only mean when you learn constantly and you learn Nigla. It means a person who also, the Shchina is always with him, never moves away from him. Und sie seinen Dira l'Shchinte. Those people at Terosim Nosei are the dwelling place for the Shchina. Now, if that's what the Zayah says really means, the deeper pshat of Terosim Nosei comes out, the far is verstandig, so it comes out like this. That number one, der Iluk von Terosim Nosei besteht in der Eichus dike Zugebundenkeit zu Teire. That the Terosim Nosei is not only the two things we said before, that you learn constantly and you're learning Nigla. It also has another aspect in Eichus, not in Kamus, that in quality, that you're so connected to the Torah completely, as ein ganzer Metzias is durch the Torah. Your whole Metzias is absorbed, is penetrated with Torah. Und kol inyana is nor was said is adira l'shchinte. This whole inyan is that he's adira for the Shchina. So that's number one that we see. And number two, die Zugebundenkeit is nicht nur zu Chochmas HaTeire, nor beikert zum nächsten HaTeire, the Schinte. That when Kol Terosim Nose, if you tied, you connected, not just to the Teire, you connected to the Eibishter who gave us the Teire. As he said, who's Terosim Nose, it says in Zayar, those are connected to the Schchine, with Eibishter. Was Hazal Limud is verbunden davke mit Nimes HaTeire. Such a limud that you should constantly feel the Eibishter, you can't get it just from Nigla. You have to learn Pnimis HaTeire. He steht befeirish in Tekun HaZeir. It says in Tekun HaZeir, which is like part of Zayar. Adavke more Kabbalah. Only people that learn Kabbalah, after later the Shechina Dira, they make for the Shechina themselves in the Dira. So we come up with a new pshat now. That Terosim Nose is not only union of Stam learning a lot and learning Nigla a lot, which is in Poshup Pshat Terosim Nose, but according to the Zayar, Terosim Nose is when you're connected to the Shechina, to the Torah, and to the Neisnat Torah, which means you learn a lot of Kabbalah, a lot of Chassidus, a lot of Pnimis HaTeire. Das is eigentlich the Yesod from them was Chassidus is mevayed the meaning from Terosim Nose. This is the foundation, the basis of what Torah explains. Chassidus explains as the union of Terosim Nose, as the limud Torah is na'ifim from Osem Dore Beficho. It says that Terosim Nose means that you're learning, and it's the Eibishter speaking from your mouth. The Eibishter is putting the words into your mouth. The Divrei Torah with the Leib zok taruis from Zaymul zayin is Masiachas Eibishter. When you say words of Torah, it's as if the Eibishter is saying it. Zokt noch the Divrei Torah with the Eibishter kaviyachol zok. You're saying. You're just repeating the Divrei Torah that David is saying. That's what it says in Torah. He quotes in the Order 45, Kedes and Chassidus. Such a limud that your words are really, the Eibush is speaking from you and you're just repeating that only comes if you're bottled to Neis Natera. Bis Naifim from Dira to Shchina, you become the Dira to the Shchina. So this, what it says in Chassidus is based on the Zayar. The Zayar says that Osim Nosim means somebody who is a dira to the Shechina, which automatically means somebody who learns Kabbalah, learns Pnimis HaTeire, and that's what Chassidus gets this idea that the Rosim Nosim means that the Eibishter, the Torah is one with you. Alpizeh is moving, so we understand here as those was the Shimon Yechoy is going to Rosim Nosim. So now apply it to the Shimon Yechoy. So when we said the Shimon Yechoy was the Rosim Nosim, he says verbunden mit dem was is given for the Mora Kabbalah. That the Shimon ben Yechoy was the source of Kabbalah. He was from the Mora Kabbalah, means the people who were involved in Kabbalah. But other Rabbi, even more than that, and is given there was not Mashpia given Pnimis HaTeire to the andere Tanoim. He was the one that gave Pnimis HaTeire to the other Tanoim. But the fire is given at the Darga Achinai, it's in the Rosim Nosei Gufa. So that's why he was in the Rosim Nosei higher than the rest, because he gave it to them. So when we said that Shimon Yechoy is the Rosim Nosei, means not only he learned a lot, not only he learned a lot of Nigla in old times, he was completely bottled to the Torah and bottled to David and was miyuched with David. What is the Rebbe trying to get to here? He's trying to get, when we say that Reb Shimon and Sano was similar to Reb Shimon Yechoy, so the Rebbe wants to explain not only because he learned a lot in Zman, not in Nigla, because even this pnimistic meaning of the Rosim Nosei also applies to Reb Shimon. So he wants to show Reb Shimon and Sano Shimon Yechoy Mamish the same adrege. So therefore, you could explain the Mishnah based on the Rosim Nosei Reb Shimon Yechoy. The mitzvah may have mateitzes beer and therefore Shimon Yechoy dafke, but this will explain why, as we said before, that only Reb Shimon Yechoy was the one that didn't interrupt his Torah to Krishma. The other Terosim Nosei Chachamim, his Chaverim, they did, as we said before. Why only him? Today, as the limud Torah is zayin na'ifim from Osem Dora Beficho, in order that when you learn Torah, it should be mamish the Eibishter words coming from your mouth. Canal, as we said before, you have to stand, you have to be completely bottled to the Eibishter. Und das wird aufgetan durch der Aveda von Krishma, that you can get to Krishma, but Sinyon is Mesiras Nefesh. Krishma is Mesiras Nefesh, and that brings you to that. So a person needs Krishma. You need Krishma in order to have the Sinyon of Mesiras Nefesh, to connect yourself to the Torah, to be full with the Torah. Reb Shimon Yechoy, but Reb Shimon Yechoy, befragt noch, wie gewinnen in Meir, especially after he was in the cave for so many years, he was always bottled to the Eibishter. He said, it says in Zayir, Anosim on the Balman. I am only a sign. I'm nothing. I'm only a sign of the Eibishter. He was so nothing to in his own, he was completely bottled. And his own is no Metzias. Und sein ganze Metzias is nur was is a simon of Gatlaka. His own Metzias that he's a sign of godliness, that the Eibishter created him and he's a sign of godliness. And he was always a dira for the Shechina, as we said before, from the Zayir for Terosim Nosei. But the far state of him, it says in Zayir, which is a strange expression, it says you have to go see Yerushalayim, Pnei Odin Hashem. You have to see the face of the master, Hashem. So in Zayir it says, Man Pnei Odin Hashem. Who's Hashem? Torashbi, it's Rav Shimon Yochai. Wow. What does that mean? Shimon Yochai is the Eibishter. The Rebbe writes in a place, Naore, Reisi Balin Nigle Machinalze, Uberash, the Sampal Nig asked, how could it say such a thing? And the Rebbe quotes that we find in Yerushalmi something, in Nigel the Torah, we find something similar by somebody else, like Yitzchak. Whatever it is that comes out, why can't Reb Shimon say, I'm Hashem? Because his whole Metzias was bottled to Hashem. So since his constant life was bottled to Hashem, when their father didn't get out from Krishma, he didn't need this introduction of Krishma as ein limud Torah, so ein leitem von der Rosim Nossi. His learning should be Terosim Nossi, which we said before means to be bottled to Hashem. So other ones who were also Terosim Nossi, but they needed the push. So they had to say Krishma, so they had to be mafsek to Krishma to push them to this level. The Shimon Yochai did not need to push. That's the reason why the Shimon Yochai, only because he was in that high level, he was the only one that didn't have to say Shema, as we said before, because of this reason, as it explains now, because he had the real Pnimis Diketerosim Nossi, which normally you need Krishma for it, and he wasn't that madrege. Now, you want to show how it was also the same thing by Shimon and Sanla, it was mamish in the same madrege. Not only till now what we said before, but in this union of the bittul to the Eibishter, of Terosim Nosei, that you did it to the Shechina by the Shimon and Sanla. Wer erzählt in Gemara, it says in Gemara, the Giger, as Reb Lozer ben Aroch, hat gebeten der Schuss bei Rebbecha und Mezaka, immer zu sagen von ihm, Dover Echat shel Madatoni Meisem Rekover. Reb Lozer ben Aroch asked permission by Rebbecha and Mezaka, who was his Rebbe, to repeat one thing of what Rebbecha and Mezaka taught him in Meisem Rekover. Now, Meisem Rekover is when it talks about in Yecheskel and Tanakh, the Rekover of David, Malachim, basically, Kabbalah, Pnimis HaTorah, in Gemara refers to it as Meisem Rekover. So he said, I want to say over something that you told us in Meisem Rekover. After Reb Lozer ben Aroch started, and he said the drash in Meisem in Yonim of Pnimis HaTorah is Yor the Eish min Hashamayim. A fire came down from heaven, mamish. The Gemara that mamish, the Gemara continues. As when Reb Yosi HaKein and Reb Shimon ben Sanlam when them gehet, when Reb Yosi HaKein and Reb Shimon ben Sanlam heard about it, they also started talking to Meisem Rekover. Omru, and they said, this was one day in Tammuz, in the season of Tammuz, and there's no rain, and you don't see any keshes, you don't see any rainbow. But the whole earth shook. And they saw the rainbow in the cloud. The Yotza Baskal, Omer, and the Baskal came out and praised them, etc., etc. So one of the two people here is Reb Shimon Asano. Zetman for them, we see from here, Reb Shimon Asano is given from the More Kabbalah. So we see Reb Shimon Asano was from those people who learned Kabbalah. His Kabbalah was so strong that it caused that the whole earth shook. The Yotza Baskal, and the Baskal came out and said, "As at Mamshach given the Shchida Lamata." What says a Baskal? Baskal is Hashem speaking. So his learning Kabbalah, when he said, brought down this Hamshoche. And from them is verstandig as given Dira L'Shchinte. So we understand that he was Dira L'Shchinte. So obviously, whatever we said before on Shimon Yochai, he Dira L'Shchinte, and it's connected to his being the head of Kabbalah. We see we can apply that to Reb Shimon and Sanul also. Zwischen the Eben the Monte Tanoim Gufe, amongst the Tanoim we mentioned before, who were before Rebbe Mazakai, you had Reb Lozer ben Aroch, and then you had also Rabbi Yisrael and also Reb Shimon ben Sanul. But amongst them is Doan Iloi Reb Shimon ben Sanul. There's something even special in Reb Shimon ben Sanul, was the Faris and Dafke Bedugma to Rashbi. That's why he is the one that's close to Rashbi, similar to Rashbi. That Ongeruf and Shimon Kenan, he's called Shimon, as we said before, shows that he's like on the level of Rashbi. Why? Because the other ones, one of the people, the first one was Rabbi Lozer ben Aroch asked Rabbi Yechon Mazaki, can I repeat something in Kabbalah that you said? So he only repeated what Rabbi Yechon Mazaki said. It wasn't his chidush. He didn't chadash, he didn't make any new things. Now, but then you had Rabbi Yisrael Kain also. So Rabbi Yisrael Kain and Rabbi Shimon and Sanel, was they were both spoke about Meisem Rekover in Haneifim from Pischu. Says Poschu, they started, which means Bekei Chatzman. They said it. It's not something they repeated from somebody else. They started. The Fat Alberach Hayidu in the Pirish from Posach Reb Shimon creates Bezer, especially the way it's known. It says in Chassidus that whenever it says in Yerushalmi Loshner, Posach Reb Shimon or Posach somebody doesn't mean. Normally it means he opened his mouth. He opened he started. But Chassidus Taichis means he opened the channel, something that wasn't in this world yet. And when he said that Varteira, he opened the channel of bringing down. So when it says on Reb Yossi HaKohen, Reb Shimon Sanel, it said the Lashon is Avhem Poschu. So they opened it, means they did it, and especially according to the Pshat Chassidus, that when it says Posach Reb Shimon Ados Meint Azerot Utkitun Anayim Inyan Betziner, he started something new and opened a new, like a new pipe, a new way of the thing coming down to this world. So the Chura, they're both the same. They both did it. So it's Reb Yossi HaKohen and Reb Shimon Sanel. Is do Anilu and Reb Shimon Sanel of Reb Yossi HaKohen. Reb Shimon Sanel is greater than Reb Yossi HaKohen. Where do we see that? Reb Yossi HaKohen. Kahuna, what's Kahuna? Kahuna is a Kohen daven in front of Hashem. I mean, it serves Hashem. That's what a Kohen is. The Zugegreitkeit lamed l'shorat lifnei Hashem. That means a Kohen is always ready to serve Hashem. That's called Rabbi Yossi HaKohen. How did he get this mile of being a Kohen to be always able to serve Hashem? Because he was born a Kohen. He inherited. The Rebbe says, so when he said something, it's not really him. Why was he so great? Because he was a Kohen. And Kohen comes, Keiches that is given from the Yerusha. So as great as it is, it's still not Mamash that he was Machadish. The Kohen came from him. The Shleimer is the Kebabayz as man is Dire L'Shchita. When do you really completely show that you're a Dire to the Shchina, and the ganze Metzias for mentions Biyuchad Meshchinte, the whole Metzias the person is connected to the Shchina, is when the Psyche B'Maisa Merkove, is when you start talking about Yonim Kabbalah, Yonim Ruchnim, like Maisa Merkunion an Leifen, was spelled Rosh Ha'aretz in such a way that the whole world, the whole earth shakes. Kommt in ganz an negative care. When does that work? If it comes from you. If you are close to Hashem and completely bottled to Hashem, because you were given extra keiches, doesn't really show your tachas habitul, because it's not really you 100% who did it. Only if you did it completely yourself. Und das gefindt man dafke bei der Shimon und Sanel, was wird nicht angerufen a Kohen. Shimon und Sanel is not called a Kohen. Had nie given a Kohen, it wasn't a Kohen. Und von deswegen hat Pesach given by Ma'aseh Merkava bei Manal. Nevertheless, he was able to start and bring down the Ma'aseh Merkava in such a way that the whole world was barash. So that shows his bittul to the Eibishter more than all the others. More than Chavada, because he just repeated, even more than Rabbi HaKohen. And that's why, that shows how great he was. The Leib from Reb Shimon and Sanel's Dejan Ma'aseh Merkava, if Reb Loza bar Neroch, this that we said that Reb Shimon and Sanel, when he spoke about Ma'aseh Merkava, is much greater than Reb Loza bar Neroch. He said, "Mutgish in them was dafke b'shas heret b'seig Ma'aseh Merkava roa sha'oretz v'niras hakeshes mono." We see that in that story. What is saying that story? That when he spoke, see when it says when the Loza bar Neroch spoke, what happened? Yod deish v'nashamayim, fire came down. What happened when Reb Shimon and Sanel spoke? Roa sha'oretz, the earth shook. What was Rash? V'nira saw hakeshes b'onam, and you saw the rainbow in the cloud. But dosik v'nanes, this was a miracle. For him to give end Kupas Tammuz, the middle season of Tammuz, was ananim zaynikim dover aroga. You don't see clouds then, at that time. So it was a miracle. We need an explanation in what has happened here. They made this miracle that you saw the cloud, the keshes. The Gemara that said Anilu if Shua ben Levi. The Gemara says concerning Reb Shua ben Levi something special. Couldn't see a rainbow. There was no rainbow ever. And Chol will not be destroyed. He promised Neich will never destroy the world. And he said, I'll show a keshes. So when you see a keshes, it shows that David is telling you, really, you deserve to be destroyed. But because I promised and I made the sign, I'm not going to do it. So therefore, yes, tzaddik gomer b'dora and tzarech. But there's a tzaddik in the generation. You don't need this sign of the keshes because the generation doesn't deserve to be destroyed because the tzaddik schus is a making on the Eden. So in time of Shua ben Levi, there was no keshes because Shua ben Levi is such a great tzaddik. He protected the world. So what's a keshes? So if a keshes, the inyan is to show that the world needs to be destroyed. So what's so special? And a miracle that when Shimon and Sanel spoke, they saw a keshes. If a keshes would be a good thing, and so his speaking Ma'aseh Merkava brought down such a great madrege, but he brought a keshes. Why would they make a keshes when he spoke something good? There's a beer in them. The explanation is like this. When it comes to keshes, we find two different things. Number one is one is that David made a sign that there won't be a mabel, which shows that really you deserve a mabel, but I'm not going to do it. The second thing, if keshes state as it says in Breshis Rabbo, that the word keshes comes from the word mukash, which is compared. Keshes represents the Eibishter. That's a lot of shot. Es ist zugeglichen geworden zum Eibishter. It's compared to the Eibishter. When the father is the din, there's a din as also stackle the keshes. You're not allowed to gaze at the rainbow. Since the rainbow represents the Eibishter, and if you're looking at it, it shows that you don't care about the covenant of the Eibishter. Imagine you stand and look in the face of a great person in his face. Not nice. So it's not nice to look at the keshes. Another thing we find, it's not only rayas, it's clear in Tanakh when it talks about the Ma'aser Merkava, the Beyaskin that they're talking about here. Like a keshes, like a rainbow in the cloud. Kain mare, so too is the mare, looks for the Eibishter, who mared muskveit Hashem, that represents the looks of Hashem. So now that we know that keshes is not only a bad, shows for a bad level. The keshes shows on the great gilui of the Eibishter. Das ist a gilui naila von Shechina, was bringt es soll sein the keshes bonen. So it's a big, great thing that the keshes shows. It shows that the Eibishter is nimshach, you mamshach the Eibishter. So when we say that Reb Shimon ben Nasanel, when he spoke the Ma'aser Merkava, he brought down, because of him, the Eibishter made the miracle, brought down the keshes when it shouldn't have been derech hateva. That shows it brought down in Gilui Lukus. And the Rebbe explains it. That Eshterinya from keshes, the first one, which shows that you deserve a mabul, and I'm not doing it because I promised. Is nor ben eskum the aim of the Ivet. Gemara says it's only when it comes in the cloudy day. Now, for a cloudy day, with the Anani Vaisna says the fact that you have the clouds themselves show that there is strictness, there's dinim, because it blocks keshes. I mean, Ananim blocks, so keshes and Ananim fits together. That in that time, when there's a time of clouds, it adds to the fact that things are not so good, and that's why the Eibishter had to show the keshes, because otherwise, who knows what he would do. But the Ananim and keshes, as kuman durch devas medashen b'maisem recover, but the clouds and the keshes that come as a result because you spoke, the Ma'aser Merkava is nicht an ace of Shelos ein dinim. It's not a sign to take away the strictness of the Eibishter. The blaze a siman of agilu naila for Shechina. That shows on a great level of the Shechina. Al pizeh is noch mehr verstanden, wie Reb Shimon Nasanel gewähnt Rosim Nosi in a neif, was gewähnt adir the Shechina. So since by Reb Shimon Nasanel, his learning Kabbalah brought down the keshes, and keshes represents the Shechina coming down. So this shows more that he was Terosaim Nose in the higher level, like Reb Shimon Yochai, that he was a dira to the Shechina, which is the real thing of Terosaim Nose. So here we see all these things show the comparison between Reb Shimon and Nasanel in the concept of Terosaim Nose, not just Terosaim Nose, but all the details of Terosaim Nose similar to Reb Shimon Yochai. Einer von den Yonim was eine Matayr, Dargos Hanayl of Shimon Yochai. One of the great things that describe Reb Shimon ben Yochai, was gesagt, is this that he said. More in Sukkah says, he said, I have the ability to exempt the whole world from strictness of the Eibishter. I have a way to protect the whole world from being punished by the Eibishter. And since Bechlal, his main thing was Torah, he was Teirim Nosim Nos. Ist verstandig, das was gekent Pater, it's called Leib Kulam Adin. So obviously, when he said I could protect, I could save the whole world from Din, he's verbunden mit the meaning from Terosim Nos. It must be connected to Terosim Nos, because his thing, the description of Reb Shimon Yochai is Terosim Nos. Whatever we find about him has to have a connection to Terosim Nos. So when he said I will protect the world, I could protect the world from David's judgment and David's punishment, must have a connection to the Terosim Nos. What's the connection? So the Rebbe explains it. So the Shnamol Gered Barucha, in the Maimon from Reb Shimon Yochai, the Rebbe, I spoke once before length. When Reb Shimon Yochai said, Yochel ani lifter eskol elon kulum min adin, I am able to exempt the whole world from the judgment. Das ist nicht durch dem, was die kennt bei Wirken der Anshe Deire und Peil sei sie on Shubaton. He didn't mean, how could I do that? I'll get everybody to do Shubah. And B'meila there won't be no judgment. That's not what he meant. Nor as Zay's chus is given as this. Nothing to do with the people. His chus was so great as nicht guckendig of the Avenis from them door. In spite of the Avedas of the people of the generation, is there seivel kolav and the same again. I could suffer for them. I could suffer for their Avedas, who pay trom, and I will pater them, I will exempt them in the din. That's what Reb Shimon Yochai, Pshat Reb Shimon Yochai. Now, the Baldas by Reb Shimon Nasanel given the Iluf and the Rosim Nose bedugmas Reb Shimon Yochai now. Since we said before Reb Shimon Nasanel was the same level in the Rosim Nose as Reb Shimon Yochai, he says, sein Luft on the Belgian al derech the Minya was Reb Shimon Yochai had gesagt, Yochel an lifter es eil and kolei and kulam in adin. So his what he accomplished in the world must be similar to Reb Shimon Yochai. Since by Reb Shimon Yochai, because he was Terosim Nosi in that high level, he was able to pater the whole world. His chus should pater. So Reb Shimon Nasano the same thing. That his chus could pater kol elam kulam in adin. Okay. Now now we'll go back because we never explained the third part of the Mishnah. We explained the first two how they're connected to the Rosim Nosei, and then the Rebbe went on to Aricha that Shimon Nasano is really like Reb Shimon Yochai, and he protects and because he was the Rosim Nosei and in all the levels, and that explained the first two things that they were said that be careful with Krishma Tefillah and make your Tefillah Tachnunim has to do because he was the Rosim Nosei. So he wanted that his Talmidim should not learn from him, and whatever the first two. But he never explained yet the third thing where it says, Al Ti Rosha b'fnei atzmacha, don't be a Rosha in your own eyes. What's that connected to Terosim Nosei? Now we'll understand it. Die Sheiches von der dritte Hero in the Mishnah will understand the connection of the third lesson in the Mishnah. Al Ti Rosha b'fnei atzmacha, don't be a Rosha in your own eyes. So the Friedrich gets way to the previous two. Dafke mit Zadem, Reb Shimon Nasano given Terosim Nosei with Reb Shimon Yochai. Dafke because Reb Shimon Nasano was Terosim Nosei like Reb Shimon Yochai. Wie das wird ausgedrückt in der ersten zwei Eros in the Mishnah, as we see, as it expresses itself in the first two lessons, which come because he was Terosim Nosei. What's mit Zadem is making of the door and his sevuk of Nesayim. So if he's like because Terosim Nosei, we said Reb Shimon Yochai because he was Terosim Nosei protected the generation, and he will suffer for their aveda. So Reb Shimon Nasano the same thing. Because Reb Shimon Nasano was like Reb Shimon Yochai, B'meile Reb Shimon Nasano was Terosim Nosei, U'b'meile he was able to protect the whole world from punishment. So he was afraid. And the first two have to do with the fact that he was Terosim Nosei. Comes the third thing saying in connection to Terosim Nosei. Don't look yourself at the Rosh. Why? Bichlal is Avos halt sich wie a Rosh. Generally, someone who holds himself like a Rosh. He thinks he's a Rosh, he won't look to do tshuva. I'm a Rosh anyway, I don't do tshuva. He's the Anhoge for Yohan usually do it. So what happened? The Gemara says that for Yidden it's good to be poor. Yidden should suffer. And we bring the mention Poronis, the Surim Rachalon Olstan, the Eibush to bring on people punishment and suffering. Was to brechen sein Metzias, break his Metzias and bring him to tshuva, bring him to tshuva. So normally, in order for a person who is a Rasha, thinks he's a Rasha, how will he do tshuva? Not because he will decide to do tshuva. There has to be the Eibush has to punish him to do tshuva. Hashenkim data from Shimon Nasano was sein schus at making even from Farid for Peronius, but we said that Shimon Nasano is like Reb Shimon Yochai. But Mele his schus was so great like Reb Shimon Yochai's schus that he could take away the punishment because of his schus. Now, if you're going to take away the punishment of schus, so the Mele people won't do tshuva. That's why Reb Shimon Nasano had to specifically say, don't look at yourself as a Rosha. We have to know as jeder ken und darf that everyone could and must. And the end will be as a tshuva. Don't look at yourself as a Rosha. Looking at yourself as a Rosha means that you're not going to do tshuva. So he's telling you the other thing of causing you to do tshuva, which comes from suffering, will not happen. Because protected like Reb Shimon Yochai. So he says you got to do tshuva anyway. So don't look at yourself as a Rosh. And even more, darf nicht onkommen zu Yisurim. You don't get Yisurim. Or can tshuva to mit Chachove v'chayim menucha v'shalvo. You could do tshuva from Harchove and living with peace and menucha and shalva, everything. But that's what he says. So it comes out that all three things that he said is because of who he is. Since Reb Shimon Nasano was Terosim Nosei, like Reb Shimon Yochai in the highest madrege, that's why he said these three things. Number one, and I repeat just in short all three. Number one, be careful, Krishma Tefillah. Don't look at me that I'm potter. Maybe you might not be so careful. Then that he told his Chaverim. Then he told his Talmidim, that he told his Talmidim, And then he told his Chaverim, who also had to say Shema, but they also didn't have to daven always. But he told them, remember, from time to time you are going to daven, make your davening technunim. And he's telling them because they didn't daven every day. But Mele, he tells them, make sure when you do daven, you might think, you really don't have to daven. If you do daven, it's a small thing. No, make sure it's tachnunim. And then he said the third thing, because it's Terosim Nosei, he says, I want you to remember you're not a Rosha. Don't think you're a Rosha, but mainly you do tshuva and don't wait for anything else. The Surim you won't get, and otherwise you won't do tshuva. So because he was Terosim Nos and he was making on the generation, that's why he said, don't look at yourself as a Rosh. Now repeat what I said in the beginning, that this Sichel Lechatchilu, when the Rebbe said this, you see again in the end, the date, that this was Parsha Ba'aleischo, the first time he spoke about this Mishnah, Parsha Ba'aleischo, and he explained the Mishnah as we explained. I don't know if all the protein were said then, but the Mishnah that it's connected to Terosim Nosei, and he said that who's Reb Shimon, Stam Reb Shimon, Reb Shimon Yechoy. And he went on to explain Reb Shimon Yechoy's Terosim Nosei. And based on that, he explained the Mishnah. And then he continued the next Fabrengen. Then another Fabrengen later, he said, very upset. How come no one asked that this Reb Shimon is not Reb Shimon Yechoy? He explained the whole thing based on Reb Shimon Yechoy, because Stam Reb Shimon Yechoy, this is Reb Shimon Asano. And that shows that people don't listen. The Rebbe was very upset. People don't follow the Fabrengen. And Bechal, that summer, this was summertime, Fabrengen after Fabrengen, the Rebbe spoke very pushed from his heart. Why people don't really pay attention to Fabrengen, people fall asleep, whatever he spoke. But then, so the Rebbe said it. So he said it's wrong what I said. So how can I give the explanation? Because it's Terosim Nosei when this is not Reb Shimon Yechoy. So the Rebbe was upset, but he said the beer still fits because it's Reb Shimon Asano, and he went through the whole thing that Reb Shimon Asano and Reb Shimon Yechoy had the same adrege. So whatever he explained, Terosim Nosei and Reb Shimon Yechoy, it fits Reb Shimon Asano. Very interesting sichel. Okay. Even though now it's still, we're not learning PIrkei Avos yet. So why we're learning a sikh on PIrkei Avos? Because according to the mitzvah of learning project, look at the sikhs, the way it's set up, they have to make sure that all the sikhs are learned. So it's fit that this week we should learn PIrkei Beis. When we get to PIrkei Beis, we should remind ourselves.
Yeah, sure.